On today's episode, with the Chicago Blackhawks season now solely being focused on the tank, I figured it would be a perfect time to talk about a Rockford IceHogs update. I'll go over where the IceHogs currently sit in the standings and plenty more right here on Locked On Blackhawks.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Jack Bushman. You can find me out on Twitter at JackBushman2, or you can also go and check out my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey for all the latest Blackhawks news and updates. And real quick, if you're a first-time listener of the show, or even if you're a consistent listener and you haven't done so already, please make sure to go and show some support. Go and subscribe to the YouTube channel. It's 100% for free and really does help me out tremendously. And for you audio folks, you can also go and follow the show 100% for free wherever you may be listening to your podcast. And you can also go and leave me a review on either Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. And spoiler alert, as I'll talk about more after the first commercial break, you're going to have to do that anyway to qualify for the 2 free Blackhawks tickets that I'll be giving away on April 10th against the Minnesota Wild. So please make sure to go do all of that good stuff. I greatly appreciate all the support. All right, enough of that. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all, as always, for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. And thank you all for making the show your very first listen here to start off your day. As I'm sure all of you have already noticed by now, since it's the title of today's episode, and since I talked about it in the intro, this episode here today, I'm recording this on Thursday afternoon, just prior to the Blackhawks taking on the St. Louis Blues at the United Center. I believe I'm going to have this drop later on Friday afternoon. This is going to be a scheduled episode for me, but I'm going to be talking about the Rockford IceHogs. That's strictly what I'm going to be talking about today. It's all about Rockford because they also are now down to their final 9 games of the AHL regular season. The good news is, while the IceHogs have kind of struggled to, I think, find their groove and really haven't gelled yet as a team, which I'm going to talk about in the second segment as well, the good news is they do currently sit in a position to qualify for the Calder Cup Playoffs. And by the way, the format for the Calder Cup Playoffs this year, and last season for that matter, is a little bit wonky. I'm about to break it all down for you here real quick. So the AHL will be sending 23 of their 32 teams to the Calder Cup Playoffs this year, and how it's going to be broken down is very odd. First, there are 4 divisions in the AHL. 3 of them have 7 teams. 1 of them has 8 teams. The IceHogs are currently playing in the Central Division. That's one of the 7-team divisions. But anyways, how the AHL postseason is going to work is, out of those 7-team divisions, there's 3 of them. The top 5 teams from each of those 3 divisions are going to qualify for the playoffs. And then from the 8-teamed Atlantic Division, 6 teams are going to qualify for the Calder Cup Playoffs this year. So that's how you get to the 23 teams that are going to be eligible. As I mentioned, though, the Rockford IceHogs sit in the Central Division. That's one of the 3 7-team divisions, and they currently sit in 5th place. They're 30-24, 5-4 on the season. And I also should add, I really do like how the AHL separates overtime losses and shootout losses. I certainly think that should be a thing in the NHL as well. Maybe that's something they end up utilizing in the future. We'll see. But I think it just looks a little bit better when you know what the overtime losses are and what the shootout losses are. So the IceHogs, they're 30-24, 5-4 on the season. They currently sit with 69 points. That has them 3 points back of the 4th-seeded Iowa Wild, and they're also 6 points clear of the 6th-seeded Chicago Wolves, who are also down to 9 games left in the season. So yeah, while the IceHogs have struggled to kind of click and be rolling on all cylinders so far this season, which I'll, like I said, get into here in just a moment, they are still in a position to make the playoffs as long as they don't completely fold it all the way down the stretch here. They still have to take care of business. One thing I do want to also stress to you all is the 4th and the 5th seed, that's all in play for the IceHogs at this point. If you go and look at the standings, the Manitoba Moose are currently sitting in the 3 spot. They're 8 points clear of the Rockford IceHogs right now. So it's looking like Rockford is either going to finish in the 4th seed or the 5th seed if they do end up qualifying for the playoffs. And that, unfortunately, would put them back into a best of 3 play-in series for a second consecutive year. If you all remember correctly, the IceHogs defeated the Texas Stars in the best of 3 play-in series last year before falling to the eventual Calder Cup champion Chicago Wolves in the second round. And right now, the top seed, it looks like it's either going to be the Texas Stars, funny enough, or the Milwaukee Admirals. Both of those teams are tied atop the Central Division at this point with 81 points. So it's kind of getting to do or die time for the Rockford IceHogs, folks. 9 games left in the AHL regular season. They are 3 points back of the Iowa Wild for the 4th seed, 6 points clear of the Chicago Wolves for the final playoff spot in the Central Division. It's going to be an exciting finish down the stretch for sure. All right, coming up in just a moment, Hawks fans, I will talk about why, in my opinion, Rockford hasn't been able to find their groove so far this year and which players will be coming back down to give the IceHogs some help in the postseason. But first, real quick, I need to talk to you all about Built Bar, which is the protein bar that tastes just like a candy bar. Are you looking for a delicious treat but don't want all of the fat and calories? Well, then you gotta try Built. And I know some of you out there are asking, well, what makes Built Bar so good? First off, they're all covered in 100% real chocolate, and they come in delicious flavors such as cinnamon churro, peanut butter brownie, coconut almond, and many, many more. Plus, they only have 130 calories, just 4 grams of sugar, and a whopping 17 grams of protein in every single bar. And right now, you can go on down to your local Walmart or Sam's Club and get you a box of Built Bars. You used to have to order these things online and wait for them to get delivered to your front door, but now go on down to Walmart, go on down to Sam's Club and grab you a 4-pack of cinnamon churro, double chocolate, or make sure to try the Built Bar Puffs. Those are delicious as well. Grab you a 4-pack of those. I promise you'll be thanking me later. Built Bar, the protein bar that tastes just like a candy bar. All right, we're back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast. Real quick, before I move on into segment 2, I got to remind you all how to qualify for the 2 free Blackhawks tickets that I'm giving away to the game on April 10th against the Minnesota Wild, the second to last home game of the regular season. It's really simple. You got to do 3 easy things. First, you got to go and leave me a review on either Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. Second, make sure to drop the name of your YouTube channel in that review. And third, you got to be subscribed to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. And the reason you need to drop the name of your YouTube channel in that review, the reason it's so crucial, well, that's how I'm checking that you're subscribed to the channel. You got to do all 3 of those things if you want a chance to win the 2 free tickets that I'm giving away to April 10th game at the United Center against the Minnesota Wild. All right, segment 2, let's talk for a minute about why, in my opinion at least, the Rockford IceHogs have kind of struggled to find momentum this season and really just haven't been able to go on a run or haven't been able to fire on all cylinders like we saw from time to time last season. Because coming into this year, folks, with everything that Rockford was able to accomplish last year, being the 4th youngest team in the entire AHL, winning their play-in series against the Texas Stars. Sure, they got bounced by the eventual champion Chicago Wolves, but so did everyone. That team just absolutely ran through everybody in the Calder Cup playoffs. So based on what Rockford was able to do last year with this young group, plus they go out and add guys like David Gust, Brett Seney, Luke Philp, and some other veterans to kind of provide some leadership there and also help players guide them throughout the developmental process. Because of all of that, everything considered coming into the season, and rightfully so, I think the Rockford IceHogs were rightfully so expected to take that next leap and maybe not be the cream of the crop in the entire AHL because they are still a pretty young group, but take that next step, be one of the better teams in at least the Central Division. And right now, as I just talked about, the IceHogs sit in 5th place in the Central Division standings, and they just really haven't been able to live up to the expectations that a lot of us Blackhawks fans had for this AHL club coming into the year. But for me, a huge reason why the IceHogs haven't been able to be clicking yet this year is because when you look at the NHL club, they've been needing bodies basically the entire season, right? Like the Blackhawks have been dealing with a ton of injuries, and now that they're post trade deadline and there's not as many of the same guys around, the roster is obviously they're without Max Domi, Patrick Kane, Jake McCabe, Sam Lafferty, Jack Johnson, yada yada yada, right? They're going to need guys to kind of fill up those spots. And even going back to the first half of the season, though, I mean, the Blackhawks really have been injury plagued all year long. Arvid Soderblom, if you all remember, was up in the NHL for like a month and a half. Definitely longer than the front office would have liked to keep him up in the NHL due to the injuries of Peter Mrazek and Alex Stalock early on in the season. Hell, we even saw not only Jackson Stauber this year, but we saw Dylan Wells from time to time too before he ended up getting dealt at the deadline. Both of those two have been up in the NHL this season. Obviously, Lukas Reichel is up in the NHL right now and has had a couple of different stints up in Chicago. He's played 18 NHL games now this season. Cole Guttman was another guy who was a valuable part of Rockford's team. He played in 14 NHL games before he sadly had to be shut down for the rest of the season due to shoulder surgery. Even on the back end, like Philip Ruse has played in 17 NHL games this year. Isaac Phillips has played in 16 NHL games. And then also the IceHogs, as a club of their own, it's hockey. They're going to have some injuries themselves, right? We saw Alex Vlasic miss not as much time as everyone expected when he first fractured his fibula. I thought, man, that's going to be a really tough injury for Vlasic to come back from. Gets back on the ice in like 3 weeks, but still he missed some time. Alec Regula has missed some time as well. Captain and leader of the IceHogs, Garrett Mitchell, has been shut down, and so on and so forth. So the IceHogs, they've just had a really hard time kind of keeping the same group together and having that. I feel like they haven't been able to have the same roster or be rolling with the same guys for consecutive games for a couple of weeks here. It's like every, other week, the Blackhawks are having to recall a forward or recall a defenseman or recall a netminder, and the AHL hasn't really been able to be left alone to let those guys kind of gel like the Blackhawks had going on with Rockford last year. So I really do think that's played a huge part in the IceHogs not being able to go on a run as of this point in the season. There's just been so many moving pieces throughout the entirety of the year. And another thing to consider, we've also seen Dylan Sakura was a veteran that the Blackhawks brought back this summer to be a key player down with the IceHogs. He got traded at the deadline. Adam Clendenning was a veteran defenseman that the Blackhawks moved at the deadline as well. Josiah Slavin was a guy who was wearing the C for the Blackhawks during their prospect development camp in the summer. He's been traded. So some of the vets that they've brought in too have been kind of shipped out. It just feels like it's been a revolving door down in Rockford for the greater part of the season. So to me, that's why this IceHogs team just hasn't been able to gel so far. And kind of looking at some of their recent results on the schedule, they just can't seem to go on a run. Since the start of 2023, they only have one 3-game winning streak, and that's as long as it went. They won 3 consecutive games, and then other than that, they've only won back-to-back games on 2 other occasions. So we'll see if this IceHogs team can connect a little bit more than they have so far this season down the stretch, because it's going to be tough for them to march through the Calder Cup playoffs if they're not able to string together some consecutive wins. All right, before I wrap up today's show, I do want to go over some of the help that will be coming back down to Rockford either in the next week or two, or even if the Blackhawks leave some of these players up in the NHL for the rest of the regular season, they'll certainly be going back down to Rockford when the NHL season comes to a close. And obviously, there's a lot of big names down here. I want to talk about a bunch of them. Lukas Reichel is up in the NHL right now, but if y'all remember correctly, he was part of that paper transaction back at the deadline, sent back to Rockford so that he could be eligible to compete in the Calder Cup playoffs. And when Lukas has been down with the IceHogs, he's been doing his MFing thing down there in 51 games this season. Reichel, 20 years old still, by the way, not turning 21 for another month or two. He's tallied 17 goals and 29 assists for 46 points in 51 games, basically right where he was at last year. Darn near a point per game player. You can expect Lukas Reichel to be leading the charge for the IceHogs when he does get reassigned. The interesting part is going to be whether or not the IceHogs play him at center or if they're going to move him to wing. Because so far in his last two stints, actually, Luke Richardson has elected to leave Lukas Reichel on the wing rather than play him at center. And now seems like it would be a perfect time for Lukas Reichel to get some reps at center, right? The Blackhawks have basically traded everyone they had down the middle. Jonathan Taves is obviously out. Philip Kurashev is out with an injury. Cole Gutman has been shut down, but Luke Richardson's elected to go with Andreas Athanasiou at center over Reichel, which I do think is an interesting choice, maybe foreshadowing that Lukas Reichel is going to be a winger at the NHL level, which I don't think is the worst thing in the world because he has looked a lot more comfortable at that position than he has at center so far in his short NHL career. So it's going to be interesting to see if the IceHogs and head coach Anders Sorensen elects to use him at center or the wing whenever he does get reassigned. Then a couple more big guns, David Gust, Luke Phil, Brett Seney. Those are the big three down for Rockford. We've seen each of them in a couple of games up with the Blackhawks this season. David Gust with the IceHogs this year has been the man. 56 games, 26 goals, 29 assists for 55 points. He's obviously going to be a key piece of the offense. So will this guy, Luke Philp, who in 51 AHL games has 23 goals and 22 assists for 45 points. And then Brett Seney's been right there with them. They have, 3 or 4 guys who are right around a point per game player, which for the Rockford IceHogs is actually immaculate. I believe they don't have a player that's averaged a point per game in a season since, or maybe it's not that. Maybe I'm misquoting. I believe they haven't had a player finish at the top of the points per game leader since like 2013 or 2014. It's been an offensive struggle for the IceHogs over the years. Not this season. They have a lot of good offensive dynamic players. Brett Seney's another one of them. In 50 games this year, he's got 19 goals, 29 assists for 48 points. So yeah, Seney, Philp, Gust, and Reichel all right there at point per game. Rocco Grimaldi was also a big piece that the Blackhawks, I guess the IceHogs, did acquire at the trade deadline. Shipping out Dylan Sekura, you're going to need some help, someone to pick up the pace offensively, and Rocco Grimaldi has been just that in his AHL career. He's a veteran at this point, only played 7 games so far with Rockford, 2 goals and 4 assists for 6 points. In total on the season, though, in 61 games played combined between the IceHogs and the San Diego Gulls, Grimaldi has tallied 62 points, 29 goals, and 33 assists for 61 points. So he's going to be another focal part of this offense for Rockford. And given all these guys who are, high-profile scorers at the AHL level, I really do think once Rockford gets everyone settled and that chemistry gets established a little bit more and they're able to play with each other for consecutive weeks and not worried about being recalled, they certainly have the talent to go on a run offensively. Another guy to keep an eye on, kind of a little bit of bias from me. If you all have been longtime followers of the show, you know I have a weird soft spot for Michael Tepley for some odd related reason. He was really good in the second half of last season on the top line with Lukas Reichel. Tepley hasn't really been able to find any offensive consistency this season. Sadly, he's got 22 points in 50 games played, 8 goals and 14 assists. Then there are some other players that the Blackhawks put on waivers as part of the paper transactions to make them eligible for the AHL playoffs. Joey Anderson actually is one of those guys. Blackhawks acquired him from the Toronto Maple Leafs as part of the Jake McCabe and Sam Lafferty trade, and Joey Anderson has looked really good on that third line with Boris Kachuk and Jujhar Khaira. So good that some Blackhawks fans, myself included, are thinking maybe Joey Anderson can be the next Sam Lafferty. He's going to get an opportunity next season, more than likely, to work his stuff. So we'll see how that goes. But Joey Anderson is eligible to play for the Rockford IceHogs in the AHL playoffs. And I believe Anders Bjork is as well. There's a little bit of a discrepancy on social media about whether or not he was actually put on waivers as part of the paper transactions. Was never announced by any of the Blackhawks media, but apparently it was something that was posted to the Rockford IceHogs transaction page. So I do believe Anders Bjork could also play for the Rockford IceHogs in the AHL playoffs. And then there's the 2 guys who we've seen sign their entry-level contracts as of late. Ryder Rolston, who did miss the greater part of the end of the season for Notre Dame due to a broken collarbone. Still no word as to whether or not he's going to be healthy enough to play in these last 9 games, something certainly to keep an eye on. And then not only did Paul Ludwinski sign his entry-level contract last week, but he also signed an amateur tryout with the Rockford IceHogs on Monday night as well. And Ludwinski, like Rolston, has been dealing with an injury himself. He missed the final 10 games of the OHL season when playing for the Kingston Frontenacs due to an undisclosed injury. So we're not really sure if Ludwinski or Rolston are going to get any action at all. And in fact, we did see the Blackhawks give out ATOs to Colton Dock and Nolan Allen at this time last year, and neither of them got into a game of AHL action. So don't be surprised if neither Rolston and Ludwinski don't wind up playing in a game, but we'll see how it goes over the next couple of weeks. Then on the defensive side of things, it's going to be interesting to see who winds up getting into the lineup for playoff games, assuming that Rockford doesn't blow it all away down the stretch here. You can guarantee that Isaac Phillips is going to be in there. He's been a staple on the top pairing for the IceHogs all year long, and if the Blackhawks were in a different situation, he'd probably already be up in the NHL. Jakob Galvis, you can figure, is going to be a key part of the defensive unit as well. He's played 55 games for the IceHogs this year, tallied at 26 points. I do wonder if he's part of the future. There's not a whole lot of open space on the back end for the Blackhawks. Galvis, as of right now, kind of looks like he may be an odd man out, but you never know. A good run through the AHL Calder Cup playoffs could change the Blackhawks front office mind. Philip Ruse is another guy who I expect to be in there on the back end. He's actually only played in 30 AHL games this season, so that kind of tells me what Rockford is focused on down there, giving some of the younger guys an opportunity. And with Philip Ruse already being 24 years old with plenty of professional experience overseas before he signed on with the Blackhawks, not that surprising that they've elected to go with other guys in the regular season, but due to his age and experience, I think he'll probably be in the lineup during the postseason. Alec Regula is another guy who's kind of in the same boat as Jakob Galvis in my mind, kind of on the outside looking in right now, but he's going to, I'm sure, do his best to make the Blackhawks front office think about him differently in the final stretch of the season here. So far this year, Regula's played in 42 games, tallying 5 goals and 15 assists for 20 points. I do think we're going to see Alex Vlasic back in Rockford for the Calder Cup playoffs as well. Obviously, he just made his season debut at the NHL level on Tuesday for the Blackhawks. Looked really good in doing so. He's going to be a minute eater for the IceHogs during the playoffs as well. And then Louis Clavier, one of my favorite names in the entire Blackhawks system, Louis Clavier. He's played in 58 games for the IceHogs this season. Think they want to be developing him. I mean, he's 6'7", 6'8". If he can figure out the skating and find a way to just be an okay skater, that's a weapon to have there on the back end. I like to see the Blackhawks and the IceHogs really trying to make that work, giving Clavier as many games as possible. So far this year, no goals and 5 assists for Clavier, but that really isn't his bread and butter. The offense is never going to be why he makes it to the NHL. It's going to be about the defensive side of things, that long reach of his, the physicality, and being able to skate good enough just to get by. So those are the big skaters to keep an eye on for the Rockford IceHogs throughout their Calder Cup playoff run. Hopefully that ends up happening. And then in that, obviously, there's Arvid Soderblom, who's going to be the guy leading the charge. And if things don't go well for Soderblom, I hope they don't, because he'll probably be, I hope they go well. I'm just going to erase that. Just completely forget what I said. I do hope things go well for Arvid Soderblom. In case they don't, though, they do have a secure backup in Jackson Stauber, who's looked good from time to time this season as well. Really impressed in his first NHL stint. So on paper, this looks like a team that really does have a chance in the Calder Cup playoffs. I know the IceHogs haven't been able to find their groove so far this year, but there's no denying the talent that can be on this roster once everyone's together. It's just going to be about whether or not there's going to be enough time for them to click and whether or not they can string together some victories. Only way to find out is to tune into the Rockford IceHogs, as they're now down to their final 9 games of the AHL regular season. All right, folks, I think that is going to wrap up Friday, March 30th episode of Locked On Blackhawks. Thank you again for tuning into the show. And if you haven't done so already, make sure to go and follow the podcast 100% for free, wherever you may be listening to your podcast, and go and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. And that way you can get the latest episode as soon as it comes out each day. Once again, thank you all for tuning into today's show. I'm your host, Jack Bushman. You can find me out on Twitter at JackBushman2, or you can also go and check out my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey for all the latest Blackhawks news and updates. So until tomorrow's episode, it's going to do it here for the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.